Welcome to another week with Outside the Circle as we continue in another great edition of Sermon on the Mount. Today we will show um, really just how to approach God about things. It's a little bit of a smaller section this week, not as much to deal with as in some previous weeks, but of course still really good content. Obviously, I mean it is the Sermon on the Mount given by Jesus himself, so of course it's going to be great. But it is a little bit more simplified than stuff before. So today we'll be starting in Matthew 7, verse 7. So let's read there. Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be open to you. For everyone who receives, for everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be opened. Who among you, if his son asks him for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, he will give him a snake? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good things to those who seek him? Therefore, whatever you want others to do for you, do also for them, for this is the law and the prophets. So, again, not really a huge section here, but Jesus does give us a good bit to kind of cover. So let's kind of just break it down a little bit, as we've been doing most weeks. Just kind of break down what's being said here. So really the big key things are really right there up front. Ask, seek, and knock. In fact, my Bible actually uses that as the title of this section. And so that's kind of the main three tenets that Jesus shows us here that kind of help us understand how we should be communicating with God, especially with our requests. And it's really done through a progression with each new layer adding more levels of severity to them. The first one we see here is ask. And this is a verbal request. It's literally just vocalizing and expressing to God your desire. It's the first step in petitioning God for something. An acknowledgement of a need or even a desire that we bring to God and trust him with it, and this kind of the establishment of communication on our part of starting with saying this is what we either need or what we want, so to say. The next is seek, and unlike asking, which is a little bit more passive, just saying, hey God, here's my request, so to say, this one's a lot more active. It's intentionally searching with both physical and mental effort. It's deeper than just asking, but it's expecting God to do it, really, at the end of the day. It's a step of faith to move and actively pursue God and his will. This isn't just praying or asking for things, but it's actively living and walking out that faith, kind of believing that God will provide whatever it is, and so actively moving in a direction and in a posture of saying, God, I'm trusting you with this. God, I'm believing that you will, take care of this, provide for this, and living in accordance to that, not just saying oh God, I hope this is a thing, but actual faith. Because see, that's the thing, is asking is more the hope side of it. It's, God, this is kind of my request, I hope you kind of come through with it, whereas faith is saying or seeking is the faith side of it, of saying I believe you'll provide. And faith plays such a crucial role in God moving. In fact, we see this with Jesus a lot. Many of his healings, in Jesus' own words, are due in response to a person's faith. There's many people that when Jesus heals them, he says, your faith has made you well. You have been, healed by your faith. In fact, you see the opposite of this in when Jesus goes back to his hometown of Nazareth, and it says that he doesn't perform any miracles or anything there because of the lack of faith of people there. Again, not it comes across on the surface, almost comes across, I hate to say it, almost like a kind of like a, oh hey, since they didn't believe, it didn't happen, like that God needs that. But it's like that's not really what's going on here. There's a lot deeper, and that's kind of a conversation for another day. But what it gets at is that faith plays an important role, because it's not just a passive of saying, well, almost like a wish on a star. Like that's not what it is. Asking is kind of the wish, whereas seeking is walking and having the heart posture in a way that says that God will provide, God will do this, and therefore I will take that next step. And that's really what our movement shows us, is that we do trust God to take care of that next step. And that's why we say we walk by faith, not by sight, because it's not always knowing where that next step is, but knowing that there is a step that will be there, because God's going to provide a step, whatever that looks like. The last of these progressions is knock at the end of the day. And this is persistent faith in motion. With knocking, it's very much it's a push to enter, so to say. It's seeking. It's beyond seeking. It's pushing past seeking into this position of receiving whatever we've positioned for, in the sense of truly going to the door and saying, like, hey, let me in. Like, this is the request, this is the petition, this is the way forward, so to say. It's through this door. And so it's knocking on it to say, like, let me in, so to say. And pushing through this obstacle. And this is the last resort of petition, so to say. Again, the asking is very passive, seeking's active, and then knocking is persistence. And that's kind of why this is the last resort. It's the most intense of the prayers and petitions, so to say. But this is how God designed it. I mean, this is how Jesus is telling us right here, of this is how we should be, that we should be not only asking for it, we should be seeking it, and we should be knocking for it. Again, it's this building. But what's really fun is when you actually dig back into the original Greek words. I wish I could share them, but I'm not going to act like I'm an expert there. But when you dig into the original Greek verbs that are actually used in this sentence here, they really, at the end of the day, imply persistence with these requests. Like, all three of them do. This isn't just about a one-time thing. The verbs themselves carry this connotation that, we're to stay asking, we're to stay seeking, and we're to stay knocking. It's persistence, it's continual, it's constant. It's not just a one and done, especially because, sometimes we'll pray for stuff and we don't get it right away, and it's like we get discouraged and almost want to stop. But it's like, no, you have to keep going, you have to keep pursuing, you have to keep, being persistent with it. And again, we don't always do that, especially when we feel like it's not coming to us in our timetable, so to say. We didn't receive it when we wanted to, and so we just don't ask, seek, or knock anymore. And that's not what this is calling us to do. Again, it's persistence. It's being persistent and staying on it and constantly doing these things in order to receive it, so to say. Now, I will say, with all this, though, we don't need... we don't need to do this in a way where we expect everything that we're asking for. And what I mean by that is, like, we can't ask, seek, and knock, for $1 million from God and expect him to give it. Not saying he wouldn't. Not saying he will. God does as God pleases. So if he wants to give you that $1,000,000, he will. If he doesn't, he won't. And there's usually, as bad as it sounds, there's a valid reason, because we as people might want something that we really don't need. I mean, let's be real. We can sit here and act like, oh, well, we're adults. We only ask for things we actually need. But it's like, let's be real. If we really got honest, a lot of times we probably ask for stuff that we might just want because we want it, but it might not be good for us. And that's kind of the thing here, is we shouldn't expect God to just hand it to us because we're asking for it. I mean, he's not some magical genie that we just get whatever we wish for, But what it does is, in the pursuit of this, especially in the seeking of it all, it really helps us align ourselves with God. And so when we're asking for things, these aren't just wants in the sense of, again, I want $1,000,000, or I want a new car, or I want, it's actually asking for things we need, such as, not always earthly things as well, like truly seeking His will above our own. And that way our hearts can be more in line with His desires, because that's where our hearts need to be. Our hearts need to be in line with God's desires, because God's desires outweigh ours in a good way. Because let's be real, our desires, whether we want to admit it or not, half of our desires are just selfish and more focused on us and not always the bigger picture. Whereas because God sees the bigger picture, His desires, play into that bigger picture that we don't always see in the moment. Like I can attest to, there's been plenty of times I've prayed for stuff that have been more of just what I wanted, whether I realized it or not. I mean, they could come off as unselfish, but in the moment, like, they might seem unselfish, but at the end of the day, they were selfish to an extent. And fortunately, I didn't get those, but, I can see now where it's like, it's a good thing God didn't give me that because of X, Y, and Z, whatever it is. And ultimately it has led to being in alignment with God and having that same desire. I mean, obviously I don't always get it right, but, the goal is hopefully an upward trajectory of trying to be more aligned with Him, and that's how we're supposed to be asking and seeking and knocking, is to receive what God has for us, not always what we want, but what we need. Because again, he's not just some genie that just hands us whatever we want. At the end of the day, He's a loving Father that gives us what we need, but not always what we want. And if we're being honest, most of the time it's a good thing that He only gives us what we need most of the time. He doesn't always give us what we want, because sometimes what we want isn't good for us. And so, but Jesus actually kind of expands upon that idea in the next verse. If we go down to, really, we've only gotten through the first verse, but if we go down to verse 2, verse 8, my apologies, second verse in this section, but verse 8, for everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks the door will be open. So again, Jesus is clearly showing that when we seek Him, that when we seek what God desires, that when we're following through with this, that, when we ask, seek, and knock, we will receive it, And again, it's not always going to be necessarily in the way we think, because again, this isn't some magical genie moment. But if we seek it and seek it earnestly and seek it for God and ask for it in Jesus' name, it will be given to us, as Scripture shows us. But again, not always in the way we might think it does. In fact, Jesus again continues along that path when we keep reading in verse 9. Who among you, if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for fish, will give him a snake? If then you, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask? So again, God knows what we need. Even in this case, Jesus is saying, like, even wicked people know how to give good gifts when somebody's in need. And so, because God is a good father, he's not going to give us something useless. He knows what we need and he will provide, but it might not always be in the way we think it is. See, God gives us what we need even when we don't truly know what we need. We might think we need one thing, but really we need something else, And this can either be, like, when we're talking about this isn't always necessarily physical things. Sometimes it's spiritual things. We might say, God, I need, I don't know, like more kindness in my life. And God might be like, actually, what you really need is patience, which will help with your kindness, things like that. Like, it's not always about physical things. Sometimes it can be spiritual things. And even seeking an earnest heart, like we could say, well, this is what we need. But really, God's like, no, this is actually what you need. We might be thinking we're asking, in this case, using the analogy here, we might be saying, like, in our mind, we might be like, well, I'm asking for bread, but really we're asking for the stone. And God's like, well, here's the bread that you actually need, not the stone that you're asking for. And it can just get jumbled up in our brains like that. Because, let's just be real. We don't always know truly what we need because, again, we only see the smaller picture at play, whereas God sees the overall picture, but God also knows our hearts better than we do. And so, again, we might think, hey, this is what I need, but really we need something else, And because he is a good father, he knows what's best for us and provides exactly what we need, even if we don't always know what it is that we need. Continuing on in the verses, though, the next part we see is actually kind of a command that goes along with all this. Jesus kind of switches it up right here with a command when we read in verse 12. Therefore, whatever you want others to do to you, do also the same for them. For this is the law of the prophets. So the word, when we see the word therefore right there, this kind of suggests that usually this is in connection to what's right above it. When you see transition words like that, but, therefore, and, all these kind of transitional words with things always shows that they coexist with what's right before it. And in this case, what we're talking about is what a lot of people might know as the golden rule of do unto others as you have them do unto you. And so it kind of seems weird when you're just kind of looking at it of like, well, why is Jesus kind of trying to connect the two? But when you really look at the fact that he's saying, therefore, basically do unto others as you would have them do unto you, again, we have to look back at what's right before this to really see what's going on. And what we see is that it does actually directly connect when you look into it. Because what he's really talking about is not just praying, or not just asking, seeking, and knocking for yourself, but for others as well. And so, again, what it's really showing is this idea of community, of saying that, you would want someone to be on the front lines with you for these things. You should also do this as well, and we're called to do the same for others, and, it's kind of pushing this mindset and challenging us to not only just ask God to do things for us, but when we see others in need as well, we should also be asking, seeking, and knocking on their behalf as well for them to get it, kind of trying to create an unselfish environment and be there for others and things like that. And so, because of that, Jesus is showing us a radical way to live, which, of course, has been what he's been doing this whole time, and that's exactly what Jesus is asking us to do, is to live a radically different life than the world around us, to the point of even saying, like, look, evil people around you are good at gifts, your Father's even better, and I challenge you to do the same, Jesus challenges us with many things that we believe, and kind of pushes us to be something new and different. I mean, that's kind of been the whole theme throughout this whole time, is pushing us to go beyond what, is already established, so to say, to live radically, not just to look and to act and to sound different, but to truly live a radically different lifestyle. And in the case of asking, seeking, and knocking, when it comes to our necessities, God, again, is a good father who will provide these things because he loves us and he delights in providing for his children, but he also does call us to do the same thing as well. Not only should we be asking, seeking, and knocking for others, we should be a part of the solution as well, especially when God calls us to do that. Obviously, the first and foremost, we do need to ask, seek, and knock for other people as well as ourselves, and again, building that community of being there for each other. But the other flip side of this is that when God allows you to be a part of the solution, take the opportunity, because God's allowing you to be a part of what he's doing and how he's moving, which is not only a huge blessing to someone else, but it can be a huge blessing in your own life. When we are allowed to do this, I mean, Jesus often loved for his disciples to be a part of what was going on. When you look at the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus didn't feed the 5,000 himself. Like, yes, he provided the miracle, but he also let the disciples participate in that and hand out, the fish and all that. And, that's kind of where we're still at today, where God loves for us to be a part of it. God loves to bless us so that we can bless others. But oftentimes, I think we as people just sit here and say, well, we'll pray for you. But what happens when God says, but you're the answer to that prayer? Like, I did create you guys. Like, the reason we're not instantly called up into heaven the second we, become Christians is because we have a mission to do here, and that's to serve the people around us and to be, the example of Christ in our world around us today. And so, Christ, granted, he is Christ, but even with the disciples, like, it wasn't always about, like, oh, hey, I'll just pray for you and that's it. It was always actually serving, being a part of the solution, because God did create us to be a part of the solution, because we are part of the solution, because we are tied to him and he is the solution. So therefore we have, I don't want to say we have stake in that, but like, we have the connection there to say, like, okay, God has called us to do this. God has called us to be him in this world. Obviously do it in his terms. That's why we should also be asking, seeking, knocking for someone else, because we need to be responsive to, okay, Lord, are you calling me to do this? Are you leading me to do this? Are you pushing and advocating for me, to be a part of the solution? But when he does, like, we need to take advantage of it. Again, not only for others, but it's a huge blessing to yourself. Now, granted, you shouldn't do it to bless yourself, because again, we should be doing things not of selfish ambition, but the fact that we do get to be a part of it, the fact that we do get to have those moments and to be a part of God blessing someone else is just such a huge blessing to ourselves, And so again, we need to be on the front lines, participating and doing this with these people, to the community around us, believer or non-believer, because you never know how you could radically change someone's life by being the blessing in their life that God has called you to be. And again, it all just comes back to when we're asking, seeking, and knocking, it's aligning ourselves with him. It's aligning our desires with his desires. It's aligning our minds with his mind. It's aligning our hearts with his heart. And when we do that, we can radically shape the world around us by being a part of this community that God has called us to do, or to be a part of, really. And the beauty is that when we're doing this, again, when we're truly asking, seeking, and knocking with a pure heart that's genuinely seeking Christ and, his will and his desires and stuff like that, we can trust and rely on it, because we know that God is a good God and a good, loving Father, and that he will provide and he will take care of us and he will give us the next step to go on. And so, again, it's persistence. It never stops. It keeps going. It's constant. The second you bless one person, okay, time to find the next, so to say. Like it's all about just constantly having communication with God, having a connection with God, a relationship with God. And in doing so, you'll not only bless yourself, but you'll bless the world around you through Christ, who empowers us to do great things and has called us to do great things. But all we have to do is to ask, seek, and knock, and all these things will be provided for us. Again, kind of a short lesson this week. Not as long as some of the others. Quick stuff, but I hope there was a lot of great stuff that you got out of it, and hope to see you guys next week.